So Sally is asking, can you tell me more about the angels that are bound and are released when the Euphrates River dries up? Thank you.
So, my friend Sally, this is a really great question, and it's a very deep and involved question. And honestly, I'm almost tempted to say, you really need to, I don't know if I'll be able to do it as much justice as I would like to in the next few minutes, but it is something that's really, really, really important to understand. And we do have some really great answers on our website, BibleAsk.org. If you just type in the word Euphrates, you'll see several of these answers that have some really great content in them as well. So I'll try to do my best job to summarize some of this as quickly as I can. So the four angels that you're talking about in the river Euphrates is beginning in the book of Revelation, chapter 9. However, when the river Euphrates dries up, which is a different event that's later on in Revelation, chapter 16. But we'll go ahead and we'll talk about this a little bit as far as Revelation, chapter 9. And if you go into Revelation chapter 9, this is talking about the seven trumpets. Now, just to give you a little bit of context as far as the book of Revelation, there's a lot of sevens as far as events that happen in the book of Revelation. So the first set of sevens you see is God's church, where Jesus, in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, where Jesus basically says, here's some rebukes, here's some admonitions, and he who overcomes, these are offerings of rewards that God has for his people. Then as you go on, basically there's a book which has seven seals, and the opening of these seals, as we see in chapter 6 and basically mainly chapter 6, is where you see, basically the judgments upon God's people, because some of the people who are, the people of God also are in need of judgment. And so there are judgments that happen. And then in chapter 7, you see God's chosen people, his true followers, the 144,000. So now when you go ahead into, chapter 8 is the beginning, or at the very last verse, it says, okay, now there's going to be seven trumpets. And so Revelation chapter 9 is the beginning of those seven trumpets. And these seven trumpets, when you think about a trumpet in the Bible, or, just in history, typically a trumpet points to war, right? It's a declaration of war. And it's basically typically to warn or prepare somebody or some people for combat. And so what we're seeing here is basically the judgments that are now going out into the world. And I'll show you a little bit a verse I think that really shows you that this is mainly what it's talking about. So the first four of the trumpets are judgments. And if you look at historically, I believe they're talking about the judgments that fell upon the Roman Empire. And once you get to verses 5 and 6, which is where we kind of are in Revelation chapter 9, these are talking, I believe, I know this is debatable, I know not everybody agrees with this, but my interpretation is these are talking about the rise of like the Ottoman Empire. And so as you look in Romans chapter 9, starting in verse 13, it says, and the sixth angel sounded. So the sixth angel sounds the trumpet. So we're getting close to the end of this. So this is kind of climactic. It says, then the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God. And it says, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels, which are bound in the great river Euphrates. So there are, in this prophecy, four angels bound in the river Euphrates, like you're talking about. And if you keep going, it says in verse 15, and the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, so like 2 million. And I heard the number of them. And so it goes on talking about this specific army and the way that they operated. And honestly, the way that's described in the following verses really, to me, reflect the manner that the armies of the Ottoman Empire conducted themselves. They went out and destroyed mercilessly. And that was really how they, went out and took over. And there's a very specific time prophecy given to them, and which was a year, a month, a day, and an hour. And prophetically speaking, this basically would be the accumulation of 391 years and 15 days. And a Bible scholar back in the 1800s, calculated all this, from when a certain event happened in the Ottoman Empire into the end of that time period. And that would have ended on August 11, 1840. And that time prophecy fits very, very well, actually, to the day. So, again, like I said, to me, this is more speaking of the rise of the Ottoman Empire and all that happened there. Now, when you go to Revelation chapter 16, it's very similar as far as, that there's a great river. The great river Euphrates is dried up. And I think there's a little bit of a difference here, although there is definitely a connection. So if you go to Revelation chapter 16 and verse 12, and it says, and the sixth angel, so this is now the seven last plagues. And so this is like the ultimate judgment of the ungodly, of those who have completely and fully rejected God. There's basically the seven trumpets are a time of, hey, this is a warning time. You see these things happening. Get ready, get ready, get ready. It's time to get ready for, the day of the Lord. Once we see the seven last plagues, this is it. This is just judgment time. There is no warning. This is it. And so, as you see in verse 12, it says, and the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. And so basically, this is a time where the water's dried up, and the time where the kings of the east are prepared to go into destroy. And the context of this is basically that, there's this Babylon, this, great city who's, doing so many evil things, that's basically, has the blood of saints and martyrs on their hands, and judgment is given into this specific entity. Now, if you look at the book of Jeremiah, chapter 46, it says something very interesting that I believe really correlates and tells you kind of the context of what, this judgment is and who it's aimed, or basically the way that it's aimed at. And so it says in Jeremiah 46, verse 1, it says, the word of the Lord which came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Gentiles. And so I think this is kind of a dual prophecy, as it pointed to what was going on in his day, judgment to the Gentiles going on between Egypt and Babylon, which is exactly the kind of language you see in Revelation. You see Egypt and you see Babylon. And so as you go forward, it says, see, in verse 2, basically it says, against Egypt and against the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. So again, we see Egypt here, which was by the river Euphrates in Carchemish, and which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. So here again, we see that river Euphrates, and you see this battle between Egypt and between Babylon. So it's a very similar context as what's going on in the book of Revelation. And I do believe basically what's happening here is, the river Euphrates was the river that fed into Babylon. It was the resources given to Babylon. And so basically it says those resources are dried up. And so this is now time where the resources given into, the spiritual Babylon is going to dry up. And, we see Revelation, it says, that the merchants will weep for Babylon. It says for in one day or 1 hour that, everything's gone. They lost all their merchandise. And so here again, I think this is another destruction. And so I think it's a little bit different in that this is more basically going into the ultimate battle of, Armageddon, basically. And you see this, like I said, in Jeremiah 46, as you go down. And it just says something very, very specific here. And it just basically talks about the destruction that it says in verse 13. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, how Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, should come and smite the land of Egypt and declare to the king Egypt to prepare for you, for the sword shall devour round about you. And so basically, it's just again a time of battle. It's a time of how do I say this? Of destruction, and basically it's the beginning of the end of Babylon, which we see, throughout the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 12, the third message given by the angel, which is Babylon is fall, or excuse me, the second message is Babylon is fallen. And so this great city, that deceives the whole world, is finally going to come to its end, and Jesus is going to come soon after and, make all things new. So again, I do think that, there's a lot of symbols in the book of Revelation. And I think that these angels that are described that come out of the river Euphrates initially in chapter 9 are more talking about the armies that lead the Ottoman Empire, which brought, a lot of judgment into the Roman Empire. And also, it's then going to come again that there is going to be judgment from, other things, Egypt, basically, which is a symbol of darkness, or, basically the ungodly people, or the Gentiles, who are also going to bring judgment to this next phase of the Roman Empire, and which I believe is, the epitome of Babylon, which will then be destroyed right before the second coming of Christ. So again, I know there's a lot to that, and I would again recommend you come to the website BibleAsk.org and look up the River Euphrates to kind of get a little bit more details as far as how that goes. Jerry, Wendy, any other thoughts on that one?
I do, and I think I got a little bit more proof to even back up what you're saying. And the River Euphrates is just a hugely important river that starts off even in the book of Genesis, and yeah, we see it tons again even in Revelation. I think there's many different meanings, but in the context of Revelation 9, I think it's interesting if we think of the importance of the river Euphrates as the eastern border of the Promised Land. If you look at Deuteronomy 11:24, it reads, "Every place in which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours, from the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, even to the western sea shall be yours." So basically here God's drawing the four corners of of the Jewish land, for the land for the Hebrews, and on the eastern border would be the Euphrates. Now, this time when you're talking about the Ottoman Empire, what would have been the eastern border of the Christian empire, of Christendom during that time? It would be Constantinople. It was pretty much the easternmost edge of Christendom, hugely important city, like next to Rome. Constantinople would have been the second. And it's interesting, there's times where Rome is often shown as like 2 feet, or sorry, two legs. It really did stand on 2 legs for a period of time. One leg being in Rome, the other leg being in Constantinople. Why can't I say that word today?
Constantinople.
Constantinople. And that is exactly where the Ottoman Empire attacked and took over and sort of made their home base. And to this day, Constantinople remains in now Islamic hands as opposed to being a Christian city.
Yeah, definitely. So, and again, there's so much to it that it's like I want to juice it as much as I can, because I could talk about this all night and go into really large depth. And we could, there's sermons and sermons that you could speak about Euphrates and this battle and these things going on, because the thing is to basically what happens right after in Revelation chapter 16. When this is dried up, there's 3 unclean spirits, and there's so many other things going on that it's just basically a culmination, getting ready, like it says in verse 16, getting ready for the battle of Armageddon. This is the last battle on earth to end all almost the word end all wars, if that makes sense.
But I think it's important not to try to say that it means the same thing every single time. I think it's important to understand all of them together. I think if we string them all together, we have a larger message God's trying to tell us. Chapter 9 is started building us up to, this is a 6th seal. So yeah, it's building us up to this period then before Christ come up to then the
Mhm.
seventh seal when Christ comes. So yeah, there's a lot that happens during that period of the sixth seal. So, and I
Mhm.
believe, and we'll actually be talking about later today about how often events at the beginning of the sixth seal would repeat again, I think, just before the coming of Christ. So it's
Definitely.
a very
And
interesting
I think
topic.
it's so interesting that these two, the Euphrates, Euphrates River, in the seventh trumpet, you see in Revelation 9 is the sixth seal, and you see the Euphrates River, drying up in Revelation 16 is the sixth last plague, and
Hmm.
so there's definitely a connection there. There's definitely, showing that there is something that's going to happen around this time where you're going to see a rise of an army, and you're going to see a depleting of resources, an economic crisis, and before basically the seventh thing, which is the last the last big event. So when you start seeing these things, don't fear. Jesus is saying, don't be afraid, like he says in Matthew 24. You see these signs, don't be afraid, but just, trust in God. Know that there are going to be big things that are going to happen in the world, but these are not what you should fear. What you should fear is not being right with God. And you should just see these things as a sign to, get your heart right with God, and stay close to him. So